that?
Yeah, I'm seeing the captions. Is nobody else seeing them?
I think you have to turn, I guess we'd have to turn them on to see the captions or,
Yep, that's what I did on my side.
Oh, okay. So you can see them, Florence?
But I had to
Okay.
turn it on. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, all.
All right. There's one more person in the waiting room.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex.
Now I can't remember how to get there when I don't have the button. Sorry. Oh dear. Liz, can you get in the waiting room?
I don't see the waiting room. Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'm just looking to see if there's anyone else we're waiting on, but I appreciate everyone's patience. Getting us started.
All right. Well, let's start with the introduction part of this meeting. Just make sure everybody knows who the city staff is. I'm going to have all of my city staff colleagues turn their cameras on and introduce themselves. I'll introduce myself first. I think probably most people here know me, but if not, Alexandra Ladd. I'm the director for the city's Office of Affordable Housing. And this little project is a shared baby between the Office of Affordable Housing and the Office of Economic Development. And so we are looking forward to co-parenting this little project to its completion. I will call out Liz Camacho to introduce herself.
And I represent the Office of Economic Development. I'm the Communications and Economic Development Administrator. And I will hand over the introduction to Terry Lease.
Hello, thank you. Terry Lease. I'm the Asset Development Manager. Nina and I work together on all the real estate transactions and anything real estate. Thank you. Nina?
Good morning. My name is Nina Nguyen. I work with Terry with the asset development. I don't know who else needs to be introduced.
I think wrapping up with me. So I'm probably the newest addition for most folks on the call here. I will be the RFQ manager for this. So if you've not already seen an email from me giving you the Zoom link on here, you will see emails from me later on. And as Alex had already introduced, we're working as a team with Office of Economic Development on here. So great to meet everyone who I haven't already.
All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the meeting is going to work. There's obviously a lot of info and we want to make sure we get through all of it. So we are going to do a short slide deck talking about what we think is the most pertinent info. Probably we will have questions from all of you. The Q&A button is enabled. So as you think of questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A as soon as they occur to you. We're going to try to answer them as we go. Also, when we're done with the presentation, we will draw from the Q&A questions. We're going to try to keep it kind of just to make sure we can get through everything, sort of keep it a little bit controlled. But if we have plenty of time at the end, we can also have a little bit of an oral discussion, but we'll try to keep it kind of through the written Q&A. That way we have a record. Everything is being transcribed in this meeting. It's also being recorded. So we will provide a written summary of all the questions and answers. We will provide the recording to the meeting and a transcript. So if you felt like the question didn't quite get answered, we will make sure that we're able to completely answer it before we provide the transcript to everybody. So don't panic. Also, please feel free to share these resources. Oh, we'll also give you our slide deck, but feel free to share links to the various resources with anyone else in the community as well. We're really wanting all of this information to get out there as widely as possible. So with that said, I will share my screen so that we can all learn about what this is all about. And let's see this. Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Looks perfect.
Excellent. All right, so we've introduced ourselves. We're here today to talk about RFQ number 6A-23-02. That sounds so bureaucratic. And I'm going to bore everyone almost immediately and talk about why we are doing a request for qualifications. An RFQ is not the same as a request for proposals, also known as an RFP. It's also not the same as an invitation to bid, which is known as an ITB. How bureaucratic and boring is that? But I want to bring it up right away because there is a very specific and strategic reason, as well as a practical reason for choosing the request for qualification pathway. And that is, we do not know what the full potential of this site is because, not surprisingly, we are not developers and home builders ourselves. So rather than, as we would through an RFP, if we knew exactly what we needed. So this is commonly, if we know what stretch of road we need paved, if we know that we want a research study done on different kinds of shared equity ownership model, whatever the specific task or services or project, that's when we would use the RFP because we know exactly what we want. For this project, we're really looking for a dance partner. We haven't even started the dance yet. And so that's why the request for qualifications allows us to describe the project, give a little bit of background on our vision for the project, and then see what the community responds with, see what kinds of innovations, what kinds of ideas, what kinds of approaches our community partners can bring to us. And then when we see one that we feel aligns with the public interest, which in this case is maximizing the affordability of these homes, then we will pick that partner to dance with. Now, the dance might not work out. We might realize as we get into it that we need to make some technical corrections. We may realize exactly what we want, and then we would go back to an RFP if it doesn't work out. Like, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on. And at this stage, really, we're just asking for ideas. We want concepts. We want, as well as the demonstration of capacity. That's really what the request for the qualification piece is all about. So I also want to talk a little bit about, when we talk about affordable housing, everybody always kind of wants to, well, what exactly does that mean? Is that HUD housing? There's no such thing. Is that low income housing? We don't call it that anymore. Is it for workforce housing? That's a little bit broader of a term. Really, the basic umbrella for anything that is built on this tract would be housing that is affordable to people who cannot afford what's in the market. So that's just kind of a basic way to look at it. And we expect that for homeownership housing, of course, you have to be employed and you have to have an income to be able to afford a mortgage. We're not sure how much rental housing this property could yield, if any. And that may look a little bit different. But I just want to be very clear that we're just picking ideas out at this stage. And that's why we're doing it as an RFQ and not an RFP. The general concept through the RFQ that I hope was expressed well in the RFQ itself, but just the general concept is, if a development partner can provide, exceed the normal affordability requirements, which in this case is 20% homeownership, 15% rental, then we want them to tell us how they're going to do that and what innovations they're going to bring to the project. And in turn, the city would offer the land for a discounted or even a full donation, depending on the breadth and depth of affordability. So there's kind of two ways we look at exceeding affordability requirements. Can you make more homes affordable, or can you make homes more affordable to lower incomes? So more deeply subsidized homes. And then the exact disposition terms will be worked out through this whole process. And they would, and again, I'm explaining in this bullet point, this last bullet point, kind of those two different ways that we look at maximizing or exceeding affordability. So the selection criteria was identified in Resolution 2023-04. You can look it up on the city's website. I think we also have it available in our resource section. But there's five criteria. There's funding feasibility. So does the respondent demonstrate that they have access to financial resources? They don't necessarily have to have them committed. Of course, you can't commit something to a project that doesn't exist yet, but like, what's your capacity for making sure that all of the funding is secured for the project? Are you providing something that you can demonstrate using data is needed in our community? And are you proposing something that's actually feasible in terms of all of the rules and different restrictions that apply? The affordability is a big criteria, of course. I've already talked about it twice. So who are you serving? How deeply affordable? How many affordable homes? The organizational capacity is always a big thing in a qualification request for qualifications. We want to know who your organization is and what kind of work you've done and who your partners have been. And then we're looking for something better than just meeting the bare minimum requirements. We want something that looks innovative, that achieves high standards for sustainability, green building, environmental protection, etc. So we're really looking at and also non-traditional funding mechanisms. You know, there's all sorts of ways to use shared equity models, land trust models. You know, how innovative can you be? Now, again, at this stage, we're not asking you to have these innovations committed. We're just asking that you to show us that you're capable of implementing them down the road. Again, we're just asking for a dance partner. This next slide, I will turn over to our RFQ manager, Florence, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of those details.
Exactly as Alex had started with, we want to give the background of why we did it as an RFQ and what the content will be. So hopefully you're feeling inspired about what can happen on the site. I'm here. I want to lay out some logistics in a couple of different slides. So thank you to those who have already reached out with your letter of interest. There is no deadline for this. Obviously, the sooner the better. As you can see on the slide, it's pretty simple information, just your organization name, your title, and the best contact information and other email addresses in case anything comes up. There shouldn't be. We have it pretty laid out in the RFQ, but just in case. When you are submitting your actual proposal, please do email me. And I'm just warning you, this next section is going to sound pretty prescriptive. The reason is we don't want anything getting lost. So email me, have track 6A 2302 in the subject line. Please add a CC to our asset development manager and the coordinator. Both of their emails are in the slide. They're also in the RFQ. Obviously, if you have any questions about that, let me know, but do email all of us. Alex went through more of the content in terms of what should be in there, those 5 different types of criteria. But biggest thing I wanted to emphasize on this slide is please organize it in a way that's very clear, you know, use numbers, follow all the headers that we mentioned, and that's all in that section 9 of making sure that content is in there. And then in section 12 gets to some of those specifics, again on the more bureaucratic side. So sorry, the 20-page limit, 1-inch margins, standard font, standard page size. With that being said, do look in those sections. If you are going to have some appendices, there definitely are some content area where we do expect that respondents will be submitting a lot of info with appendices. Perfectly fine. Just make sure that's labeled and that it's very clear. Two pieces of information that they're just further up in the RFQ. That's why I wanted to mention it down below. Please include a signed cover letter from the person empowered to conduct real estate. Just very simple. And then also a paragraph somewhere in there that describes how your organization is a qualified grantee. The different types, there's a pretty large range. This is described in page 2 of the RFQ. Again, not in that further section 9 or in 12, but this is important for that aspect of if there's going to be a land disposition. Alex, do you mind going to the next slide? So again, this is an overview. If you have made it here today on this call, I think you have a general sense of how this timeline is looking. As you know, the RFQ was released last Monday. We are having our conference right now, so we're still pretty early on in the process. We will have a recording of this available for folks who are not able to join today. Please, if you have any written questions, do submit them to me by email by next Wednesday. That's the 27th. And we promise we will get you answers to those by January 3rd. So far, we've been able to turn them around pretty quickly, but just wanted to note that deadline as well. The main deadline that really matters the most is that submission due date. That's on January 15th. That is a Monday. That's at 5 p.m. If you needed to change any aspect of your proposal, once it's already been submitted, it just needs to be by that due date. But we can, accept an amended one, but do have that submit a new version. We're not amending specific lines. But fortunately, the selected project, that announcement will be pretty soon after that submission due date, and there will be some further negotiation until early February on the 6th. Alex, do you mind? Yep, thank you. So I know we both went through a lot of different materials, and not everyone who will be responding will be even be on this call. So I just wanted to point out where you can get some materials. Again, always feel free to email me. My contact will be on the last slide. If you go to sfpublicassets.org, that's a shortened link that is going to populate to the image that you're going to see on the right-hand side, really to that first arrow, that real estate asset redevelopment page. You're going to see a link for Las Estrellas, or if you see the little sub tab for Las Estrellas, click on that. You will see a whole bunch of information detailing the site. And then there's going to be a section for documents that has this RFQ that we've been referring to, a lot of the information in here. It also has the topographic site map, area median income. You're going to want that for some of the sections for the affordability. It's going to have the feasibility study, and then a lot of the rules for the specific area. So that's the covenants, conditions, and restrictions with amendments. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, but I just wanted to point everyone to this page where you'll get the most information. Some of this is also on our website as well. That's for the Office of Affordable Housing, but this is the main centralized site. And then I think I'll be turning it right back over to Alex just to close out with a little bit more specifics, and that's more on some details within that feasibility study, if you haven't already taken a look at it.
Thanks, Florence. Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate that any future development of this site is subject to lots of rules and restrictions and guidelines and requirements. Some of these are listed here on this slide. The other point that I think is important is that there's a maximum building height of 18 feet, which is a one-story building. Although the slope on the site may allow for kind of building into the slope a little bit. The feasibility study that was done by Wilson and Company and is available to anyone who is interested shows that the site is fairly well served by infrastructure, which is always a nice thing from a planning perspective about more of an infill site. The water distribution pipelines are there. There's vehicular access. There's also access to the trail network, as well as all of the open space resources that are required in Las Estrellas and on the site. We do think that the sewer system will require a lift station. There are a couple of options discussed in the feasibility study, and then all the dry utilities will need to be extended to the site. But I also wanted to emphasize that I think surrounding neighbors have justifiable concerns about how does traffic flow work and where is the ingress and egress for this site. And we don't know that yet. At this stage, for the purposes of this RFQ, we're not going to get to that level of detail, because that will have to be built out in terms of a specific proposal for land use entitlement approvals, as well as approvals for the Las Estrellas master plan requirements. So at this stage, we don't know any of that yet. We also, any project built there, just because it's on city-owned land, doesn't mean it gets to skip any land use entitlement steps or approval, any steps of the approval process. So there will be an ENN, there will be all of the regular public meetings, public hearings in front of the Planning Commission, et cetera. So, so there will be lots of time to kind of understand those more specific technical aspects as the project concept gets developed into an actual application. So, and I thought this was probably this was probably well, at least this was my $1 million question about this site, was really how buildable is it? Because we know that it is in this area with arroyos and drainages and slope. So the Wilson study looked at all of those issues, backed out everything that would not be buildable, and created this map on the right side of the slide. The white areas show where both slope and drainage would allow for building to happen within all of the guidelines, within all of the rules, within all of the requirements that apply to this site. So from the approximate 19 total acres on this tract, Wilson projects that about 12 are buildable. At the allowable density, that could allow for approximately 86 homes. It won't be more than that for sure, and it may be less depending on how the design the concept design comes to fruition. But I'll pause.
Alexandra, on
Yeah.
that point, we have a question regarding, I'll just read it to you. There's a small discrepancy regarding the number of units in Tract 6A. The feasibility study says, quote, based on the Las Estrellas master plans, units per acre metric yields a total of 86.18 units for development in Tract 6A. Based on the size of the tract and the zoning on the tract, the master plan states that it allows up to 116 units, including, and you just made a comment that it would be no more than that. So we just wanted to get that clear. Allows up to 116 units, including affordable and market rate units. Could you please help to clarify this?
So I'm gonna have to get back to you specifically on why, because I'm not really remembering, because that number is in there, but the 86 is based specifically on this feasibility study. So this takes out the required open space, the drainages, the connections that are required to the trail network. So I would this number is the number we're going with, not the 113, because it's possible. But I will figure out exactly why it says that 113. I'm not entirely familiar with that part, but we will answer that and make that answer available to everybody.
Yeah, and it's 116, just
116. Okay, sorry. Were there any other questions while we have this slide pulled up about slope or drainage or buildable area? And I think it's probably hard to see because this is sort of small, but you can see it better in the feasibility study itself. The slope map here is coded so that the red shows the buildable areas well, I should say, shows the areas less than 30% slope. The blue or the purple is the areas above 30%. The black hatch marks are the drainage areas. And I can't read what the green is. That may be, well, it's either slope or drainage. So it's colorful though. It's pretty. All right. Well, let's move on to our last slide. And I'll turn it back over to Florence?
Absolutely. So it sounds like, if anything else comes in, we know on the technical side, it was only released last week. People might come in with some other questions. We will be sure to make sure those answers are made available on an ongoing basis within that time frame that I mentioned before. Please, again, that main deadline for questions is next week. We're so sorry, on December 27th. So try to get them in. We will try to get those answers as soon as possible. And if you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I'm the workforce housing advisor, but for this purpose, the RFQ manager. I think one question I wanted to just attend to quickly in the chat because it wasn't related to the slope design, but just more the process with the RFQs. We're still getting our answers specific for RFQs. I know for sure for RFPs, that is a state procurement issue. That's why we can't talk about it. It's very technical. I believe it's the same for RFQs as well. So that's why we wanted to invite people here if there were any questions about this initial stage. But rest assured, there are a lot of other opportunities for comments and feedback from the public later on. Hopefully Alex's answer, in detailed explanation in the beginning of why we set this up as an RFQ, for why we approach this work, to understand that some of the types of questions that we know neighbors might be asking, such as traffic, they might just be a little bit more applicable later on once we actually have proposals.
Yeah, and I think that this is more of a legal question, so maybe we will send it over to our legal department regarding regarding the process and whether or not the public has availability to it.
This is Kim Shanahan. I posed that question. I think that Ms. Frank is responding to, and the reason I asked it is because the participants in the RFEI process, which is a little bit different, all wanted their proposals to be known to the public. They actually wished that they could be out there in the public commons, if you will, to have the public judge, and that never did happen. And Alexandra, you're fully aware of all of that, and it was somewhat controversial. Although the city attorney at the time gave an unequivocal opinion that they had the right to do that and to keep it somewhat close to the vest. But I would contend that actually is one of the reasons why it became such a horrible process that ultimately did not succeed. So anyway, I just kind of want to put that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I appreciate that point. We have rules when it comes to procurement, and so we will refine this answer. But at this stage, we the different submittals will not be made public once the city makes a choice. It is for an RFQ, I believe, and I will confirm this, any respondent that wasn't chosen, it's their work. They can make it public as much as they would like. But we, at this stage, until a choice is made and evaluation is completed, we cannot share the content of those proposals.
Just to be clarifying that, Alexandra, the RFEI process with Midtown, the participants were not allowed to share it, even though they did own it, and they were subject to disqualification if they did share it.
That's right. And I think this is a little different because it's an RFQ, so it doesn't have to follow quite the same stringent rules that the RFEI did. With that said, we still have rules. So we will we'll clarify exactly what those rules are. And I understand the desire this is a public asset. I understand that the public feels invested in making sure that the asset is used in the interest of the public. And that's really important to me as well. I feel very strongly about that in terms of the affordability of housing. And that is something I'm devoted my career to supporting. So we are keeping that in mind. I think because this is still such a conceptual stage, we will expect that this project will be, as it becomes more technical and more finalized and gets to the point of entitlement approval, of course, it becomes very public.
If I may add to that, Alex, just a comment about the public participation in the choosing. I want to refer back, a lot of this RFQ is based on the resolution approved by the governing body. And the resolution there is very specific that the manager shall create the investment committee, that will make the decision, if you will. I think if there was a desire to have the public's involvement in choosing, it would have had to have been really laid out, I believe, in that resolution. So I just wanted to add that.
Well, thanks for that, Terry. And I think I probably should have talked about this earlier, but we will have our Community Development Commission review the applications, just like we did with the lot on Alto Street. So they are members of the public. So there is a public evaluation process somewhat built into this, just to reassure everyone that it's not just me picking my favorites. But I appreciate that. I understand why that's important.
If I could maybe jump in and just kind of introduce myself. My name is Kevin Pazine, and I'm co-chair of the Santa Fe Estates Neighborhood Association. And we're just down the street on Francesca from Tract 6A. And when the city passed its resolution in September, we met as an association and met with members of Las Estrella and Alex. Thank you for coming. And the mayor and Rich Brown from Econ and Development. And we met for about 2 hours, and it was a very, very productive meeting. And I think the consensus at the end of the 2-hour meeting was that the city is indeed going to respect the associations and the community's concerns on this one, especially with respect to staying within the master plan and its covenants, conditions and restrictions as best as possible where they're reasonable, and respecting the land at Tract 6A. Indeed, there are height restrictions. There's a setback restriction on ridgetop, and we'd like to see that respected. And indeed, the feasibility study with its estimate of 86 buildable tracts, we are even concerned about that. We find that rather, I don't know, that's rather generous, because indeed Tract A has some severe ravines, or arroyos, sorry, and hills, and just because grades are under 30% does not mean they're buildable if you care to go out there and stroll the area. So our consensus view from that meeting was indeed transparency is of the utmost importance, and I'm glad to see that's being discussed at this Zoom. And one other thing we would consider is if you're looking for flatter land that would lend itself to affordable housing and more than just tiny single family units, indeed, cross the road of 599, and things are much flatter, more accessible, and more buildable there. But I thank you for letting me jump in here and introduce myself. And indeed, we're going to be following the situation closely and invite the continued transparency of the proposal process. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you, Kevin.
Cousin. Sorry, Alexandra, we have a few more questions. If we could get through those before somebody jumps in. We have, will there be a homeowners association? I know he just spoke a little bit to that. I don't know if you want to look through some of those questions and answer that.
Yeah, I believe there has to be an HOA in order to be compliant with the other Las Estrellas guidelines and requirements. But I'll find out for sure from a legal perspective. But generally, most new projects do have HOAs to take care of the common areas and make sure that the different environmental sensitivities are addressed. I think another question that sort of piggybacks on your comments, Kevin, was, can the developer suggest a lower density? Of course. The density restriction is on a maximum, not a lower. It can be suggested at whatever is financially feasible for the concept that this developer has, and if it meets the city's desire for greater affordability than what is required under the code, then of course that is welcomed. Did you, Kevin, if you had a specific question or comment just to memorialize it, please also type it into the question and answer, just so we can keep track of everything and make sure that everyone has the same information. It sounded more like comments, and I appreciate those comments, and we'll note those. But if you have a specific question, I also encourage anyone to put it into the Q&A, because we want to make sure that, in the name of transparency, that all of the information is available to anyone, whether they're sitting on this meeting or not. And I think Kim also asked another question, which is there a target percentage of market rate homes the city would like to see? I mean, the city would like to see everything below market in terms of, what's good for the public interest, because we know how unaffordable our housing market is for most people in the workforce. But it's so we're not setting any targets. We want to see what our development partners can do at this stage, or think they can.
And Alexandra, you're referring specifically to tract 6A, not the other 7 tracts. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you for clarifying.
And then we had another question from Kim as well. Is there any talk of considering either via loans, bonds, or grants to help subsidize infrastructure costs that will ultimately be owned and maintained by the city?
Yeah, so all of our Affordable Housing Trust Fund resources would be made available to any project that qualifies to use them, and using the trust funds to pay for infrastructure is certainly allowable. But it would have to happen through the application process for those funds.
Are ADUs allowed by the Las Estrellas covenants?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer, so we'll find out.
Okay.
And there's another question. Just to confirm, regarding community benefit, development of this tract will require a percentage of affordable housing. True. Specifically, the developer cannot pay into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in lieu of providing actual affordable housing. The whole point of this, is that we want to leverage the value of the land to support the affordability of housing. So there's kind of 2 ways to answer. There's 2 levels to this answer. The first level is any home ownership housing cannot pay a fee in lieu unless the governing body approves it based on hardship. It almost never happens. I've been doing this for 11 years. I can think of maybe 4 times that exception has been allowed. Rental housing is a little different, because financing rental housing is a lot more complicated, because you actually have to finance the operational costs. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I don't think this tract is going to support high density rental housing. So so to answer that, the entire reason to go through this process is to maximize the opportunities for affordability on this site.
And we have a question from Mr. Miles Conway. You're on mute, Mr. Conway.
I don't want to oversimplify it, but I have a simple brain. So one of the best current affordable single family detached housing projects in Santa Fe right now is, I think, at 60/40 that's under construction right now, because that's the most that could pencil out to make it feasible for that developer, accessing all the free land and tax rebates that were on the table. So I was just curious. I have 2 questions. One is, as the city contemplates donating the land, if a developer comes forward and says, hey, we can get to 25% true affordable housing by definition, and 75% market rate, or alternatively, we can get to 50-50, is the city in a position to say, well, we're going to donate 50% of the land if you're reaching that threshold, or knock 40% of the cost of the land off? That's question one. And question two is for developers that don't have the scale of operations to build all the housing really fast, is that a consideration in the plan? Like, what if a developer comes forward and said, hey, I can build all 86 houses, I can reach this affordability threshold, but it's going to take me 10 years. Or is the city concerned with looking for a developer that can just like bang it out in 5 years, or any thinking along those lines?
Miles, could you also enter these questions into the Q&A just so we have the written record of them as well?
Sure.
And I'm going to answer in a little bit more generalized terms because you're asking pretty specific questions that we probably won't really fully understand until we see, excuse me, what the proposals look like. But yes, you're right. Conceptually, that is the idea, that the greater the affordability, the lower the cost of the land to the developer, to the point at which it could be fully donated if the developer can demonstrate like that is the absolute maximum. You know, we are governed by the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act, which is an exemption to the anti-donation clause. So we have to make sure that we can quantify that the public benefit of providing a publicly owned asset to a private developer is paid for with that donation. In other words, we have to make sure that it's equivalent to some degree. Otherwise, we would be in violation of the anti-donation clause. So that is a calculation that we will be considering as we look at what the specifics of the proposals are. And see, I already forgot the second part of your question because
it was, and now I thought of the third part. It was about the time. Like, if you have a slow developer,
yeah,
if you
the
have a slow
timing.
developer, and I guess a little follow up to your answer right there is, I understand the sewage lift station is a huge barrier to developing this tract in an affordable manner. And so if a developer came forward again with that 50-50 affordable market rate, but then said, can you bake in 50% of the cost of the sewage lift station into the land donation calculation, would that be possible?
So yeah, and I'm speaking entirely theoretically here. I'm not making any commitments on behalf of the city. I just want to be really clear about that. But yes, you're right. You're spot on about that. The sewer lift station it's a public benefit, right, for anyone who lives in a home that needs it. So that's a public infrastructure piece that could be certainly justified as part of the donation. But I'm not promising that it would be. I'm not making any commitments here at this level because we're really, really theoretical right now.
Thank you.
You bet.
And the last part of the question was the slow developer.
Oh, the slow developer. You know, I don't think well, I don't know to the degree I think it's hard for a developer to hold on to a project that takes 10 years to build out. So I wouldn't expect that would be in anyone's game plan necessarily. You know, of course, we had projects up in Las Estrellas that got delayed by 2008 crash and all sorts of other things. So it's, you know, I guess I would never say never kind of thing. But we always, when we provide a public asset, we create a timeline. They call it in the economic development world a clawback. So if a certain performance measure isn't met by a certain amount of time, the resource goes back to the city. So that's always part of our agreement.
And then we have two other questions. If the RFQ identifies one dance partner and then the partner starts stepping on the city's feet, how can the city change dance partners?
I think that's a great question. The RFQ allows us to, we can just do another RFQ. We can just repost it, open it back up again to the community. Because at this point, at an RFQ point, we're not making any commitments yet. It's not until we've fully negotiated that disposition agreement, and then, as in my former answer, we're baking in those clawback provisions so that if those performance measures, if suddenly the dance partner is like, you know what, I don't like the two-step, I want to waltz or whatever. Sorry, not to beat the metaphor to death, but then at that point, the city is within its right to change partners.
And just to
So
add to
Alex,
that,
the reason I asked that question again goes back to their RFEI on the Midtown, which was
Hey,
contemplated.
Kim,
You
I'm
know,
gonna, Kim,
yeah.
Terry had a response, and he is an asset.
Okay.
He's our assets development. So let's see if
Awesome.
he might be
Awesome.
able to answer it. Yeah.
Thanks,
I just
Alex.
want
Thanks, Terry.
I just wanted to add to that. The RFQ is designed to where, well, as Alex mentioned earlier, once an award is made, there's a negotiation process that's entered into because there's a lot of variables that have to be worked out. And if we cannot come to agreement with the company that was awarded, we can actually go to the second ranked company and negotiate with them. We don't have to issue a new RFP. So we could do both either. I just want to make that point clear.
Thank you,
Thank
Terry.
you.
And that's very edifying because it's exactly what people hoped would happen with the Midtown after Sienna Partners failed, and that did not happen. So that's why I asked the question.
Miles, can you just type your questions into the Q&A? Just bullet point.
I'm doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, and Alexandra, one other question. I think that the previous question was about one dance partner. Are you willing to accept multiple partners in any of the RFQs, or is this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liz. We always welcome any collaborations. We've had respondents partner up. One respondent, part of the project might be in their wheelhouse and somebody else might be good at doing a different part, and they'll partner. So of course we can support a collaboration that would be a single response, but would be sort of a unified response, but different partners. Absolutely. And I think there's a question about, will a survey be available to us? I'm not sure what kind of survey. The other question is, will there be a description of current infrastructure availability? That's in the feasibility study that Wilson did. There's actually maps that show where the water lines are, and where the wastewater lines are, and it's pretty clearly marked.
And Terry Sanchez, if you don't mind just clarifying survey, it sounds like the survey you're looking for might be that feasibility study that Director Ladd is talking about. But if there's a different type, that'd be helpful to know.
Basically, the survey is just where the corners are, how fast. I mean, what does the site look like right now? I mean, we did see a small little section with the red and the green and whatever, but it's nice to know if there's some topographical lines to where you could actually see, because if you're would like to present a lower density, as the other Kevin had suggested, you would have to really look at the site to see what would be a possibility. And would you consider like fourplexes or a duplex or fourplex? Would the city consider that? Because sometimes you can do a multifamily in that, and and it's still workable, still affordable, and except you have adjoining walls. So those are things that we probably would want to incorporate some ideas. So a survey basically is, what does the land look like?
So that information is in the feasibility study.
Okay, thank you.
And there's also a topo map that's in part of the resources if you want to just look at the slopes.
Okay.
Yep, it's all in there. And in terms of housing type, we're up for anything. We just want to know what a developer has the potential and the capacity to create and make it affordable.
Okay, thank you.
And this is just me, my opinion, but based on those buildable areas that Wilson identified, I think it does lend itself to more of a cluster type of housing layout where housing would be possibly some attached walls, but so clustered with open space in between and access to the trails, because we know that's important. But I think it's also it's really important for the people living in the house to have that access to open space that's part of the project, and you don't have to get in your car and drive somewhere to go for a walk. My opinion. Yeah, are we at the bottom of our questions, Liz?
Well,
Oh.
we received one more about, can you please clarify why the timeline for response is so short and during the holidays? If the goal is getting the best and most competitive responses, this is an unlikely way to achieve these important goals. I think for us, one of the things is the urgency of the housing shortage and to generate more inventory. So as soon as we could get this going, that's when we started the implementation of it. And there will be a possibility, as we've seen in other assets that we've managed in the past, of an extension if something isn't necessarily up to the criteria that we are setting. I don't know if Terry or Alexandra, you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think you described it really well. We're just trying to get things rolling. Terry, did you have anything else to add from an asset management perspective?
No, I think did a great job.
We have two more questions in the bottom there. For affordable rental housing, is it assumed that Santa Fe Civic Housing Authority or the County of Santa Fe Housing Authority would manage or administer tenancy of the properties? Or does it assume that the developer would retain management responsibilities? If the developer remains in the deal, it's a multiple part question. What would be the time commitment? I don't know if you want to go on to one part of it before the other ones.
Sure. So it is not assumed that the housing authorities would manage a subsidized rental housing project at all. Most subsidized rental housing in this market is offered through private companies using the tax credit subsidy, which has lots of requirements for the ongoing management and compliance requirements. The 15-year restricted period is a thing of the past. I haven't seen a restricted period for less than 30 or 40 years in a long time. I think tax credits have been around for about 20 years, maybe a little bit longer. And initially that 15 years seemed like enough, and we're realizing that it's not. So so it would almost guaranteed to have double that time commitment.
And I think we're going to be wrapping up now because we gave an hour's time. So I don't want to go past that. But one last so Kevin Pausen had a comment that we will take into consideration. Lisa from HomeWise Hubble's question regarded very similar in terms of the timeline. And then we have a clarifying question from Miles Conway. Will the city, and this will be our last question, will the city be able to vary the donation value of
I
the
think you answered
parcel?
that. I just entered it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Did you want to add anything else, Alexandra, Florence, Terry? Final
I guess
notes?
just in terms of final notes, because I know some of the last ones that came in there are either some additional questions or some more statements. Just want to rest assured we are collecting all of them. We're going to publish an FAQ. We would like to update that at least 2 times before that submission date. But if you feel like your question is not answered, please direct them to me. And especially for those comments, duly noted. Absolutely. We can make sure that's passed along to the evaluation committee.
Thank you, Florence, Alex. You guys did a great job. Appreciate it.
Thank you to the rest of the staff. Thanks to everyone for coming to our meeting.
Yeah, thanks. Congratulations on getting to here. This is a really important parcel.
Thanks, Miles. I appreciate that. Took a while. Could city staff stay on for just a moment? Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Nice job. Yay.
Could someone pause the recording or just make sure they get it over to me?